Welcome to devMode.fm, a podcast dedicated to the tools, techniques, and technologies used in modern web development. I'm Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107.
I'm Earl Johnston from Hypatia Industries.
I'm Patrick Harrington from Mildly Geeky in Boston.
And I'm Jonathan Melville from MDD in Atlanta.
And today we have on our show Brandon Kelly, the man, the myth, the legend, the kingpin of CMSs. How you doing, Brandon?
Doing good. How are you doing, Andrew?
Doing awesome. So we're having you on because I hear like a little something happened recently, something about like you released like a minor update or something like that.
Yeah. Just a little thing. Yeah, we released Craft 3. Biggest update to Craft since 1.0.
Yeah, so for people living under a rock, because we do have some people that may be listening that may or may not have used Craft CMS before. So first of all, what is Craft CMS? Like if you were out riding a camel with some people and you bumped into someone and they asked you, hey, what is that Craft CMS thing? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's just a content management system that's trying to create a really, really nice editing experience for authors and a flexible content model for developers to do whatever they want with it without any friction.
So is it like WordPress then?
Yeah. So someone recently, just actually yesterday, mentioned a pretty good analogy as far as analogies go. Said, WordPress is like you're trying to build a motorcycle and they give you a car. And so you have to kind of disassemble it and recreate it with the parts. Whereas Craft is just like the parts store, and you can build exactly what you need out of it.
Right.
So yeah, and I think that's pretty apt. It's we're trying to be pretty general purpose in terms of what your content looks like, and in terms of where the content's supposed to live and be consumed. And so, we just try and create really flexible tooling for developers to really just, envision what they want to create and go and build it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, my first experience with anything CMS-ish was ModX, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which happened to be the CMS that we used at my software company. And then as a favor for a buddy of mine, I did some work. I'm like, how hard could it be, building some web thing? And I built something in Expression Engine. And the thing I remember the most is I was just banging my head into the wall, like trying to get it to do what I wanted it to do. Like I knew what I wanted it to do. And I could have just dropped down to PHP or something else and done it. But like it wouldn't do what I wanted to do. And then I saw this Craft thing came out. And the first thing I thought was, oh, that's from those plugin developers. Like what the hell do they know about making a CMS, right?
Not a lot.
and then I revisited it later on, and it was like a breath of fresh air, because there was actually like this Twig templating language that I could actually like have variables, mm-hmm. which you couldn't even have those in Expression Engine unless you had like a billion extensions installed or whatever. But so enough about that. I do have a question about the Craft CMS version 3. Like, why is this an important release?
Why? Because so actually I wasn't kidding. We did not know what the hell we were doing when we built that that first version. We had lots of experience with plugins and kind of conforming to the coding standards of an existing ecosystem. And I don't know if it was just that PHP has just evolved so quickly recently, or if we just really should have spent more time, getting up to date with what modern coding standards were at the time. But looking back, and it's archaic, the types of stuff we were doing back then, and the kind of performance nightmares that we were employing, and basically the first and foremost goal with Craft 3 was like, let's do this right this time. Let's go through and apply modern coding standards and take everything that we've learned about what we did right and what we did wrong, and just rewrite this whole CMS from the ground up with all of that in mind. So
maybe you did something kind of like what I do. Like when I'm working on plugins now, I just imagine that Brandon Kelly is sitting over my shoulder and judging me and judging my code.
Well, for me, it's you. It's you're the mysterious. Yeah.
Well, then, I mean, you're
because
doing it
it's
all
all
wrong.
am I doing this in the most performant way? Because if not, the time to first byte's going to suffer, and then Andrew Ross is going to get mad about it.
Yeah, and then that scumbag is going to harass me and yada yada. No, but I mean, I think there is some merit to that. The idea of thinking about, well, other people are going to look at this code. Is this really like the right or best way to do it?
Yeah, for sure.
But Craft 3 CMS in particular, or Craft CMS 3, or however you guys want to term it, I think is super important because you guys really did, like, you rewrote everything, right? Yeah,
we did. I mean, it started with the new version of the framework, Yi, which came out 2.0 a couple years ago, and they rewrote their whole thing too, and built it all based off of PSR standards and really did a great job with it. And so that was really inspiring. The first couple of months were just like, let's try and get the existing code base working on Yi 2. But after that, we had enough exposure to Yi and this the nicer new coding standards and all this stuff, and thought, man, let's just go all the way here. We're already breaking every plugin just by moving to Yi 2, no matter how much or little we change beyond that. So we might as well go all the way.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that philosophy. And I will say that as I've spent more time just learning Yi 2, because you kind of have to.
Yeah.
If you're doing plugins, like my code gets smaller and smaller because I find pieces of the framework that are already doing what I want, and I might as well just use that. And I think the Yi guys did an amazing job, but I gotta say, like, their marketing, man, I never knew that Yi stood for yes, it is.
Oh.
And as soon as I found that out,
no, I know. It was that was like the number one reason why we weren't sure if we should use it or not.
Seriously. I mean,
it's an amazing framework, but it's very clear that, like, the people that are behind the marketing are not in the United States, and everything's kind of going through this translation barrier.
Or maybe just not marketers, right? I mean, a lot of the best programmers I know are terrible marketers because they consider the product to be the thing, and everything else is just fluff and not that important.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with that, but I think that obviously the type of person that you want coding something is not the type of person you want selling it, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's like it's interesting because you compare it to Laravel. Laravel is an excellent framework for sure, but in addition to that, Taylor does have a nice marketing sense, or at least the people that he's working with do. I know he does some work with Jack McDade and various other people in the community that have kind of stepped up and helped out. And it kind of has this this propagation effect where, like, everything in that community seems to be pretty well marketed and pretty well branded. There's a pretty high production value to, like, basically everything in that ecosystem. Whereas Yi, it's definitely not the same. Like, I think we try and do a decent job with Craft, and that has kind of helped Craft's ecosystem. But that's definitely kind of a silo compared to the majority of the Yi community.
And the interesting thing is that Yi is actually a really, really robust framework, but it's kind of like, I mean, you're right that Laravel is kind of, the sexy girl you want to bring on your arms to the awards show, and but Yi is, the woman that you want to end up marrying, to some extent, because it is a, hey, you signed up for this, Brandon, when you came on. I mean, come on.
Yeah. No comment.
I've always, when I explain to clients, because sometimes there's the question of, what is it built on? I say, Ruby on Rails is to Ruby, is, Yi is to PHP. You may not have heard of it. It's, it works really well. It's, industrial strength. It's not the sexiest framework out there. There are prettier ones, but it works incredibly well. It's so well thought out. And Craft 3 has really driven that home. Plugin development has become so much better, not having to rely on. And as much as I love Plugin Factory, I could never remember, the kind of the camel casing or the syntactic sugar that Craft 1 and 2 used. It's so nice to just be able to have my autocomplete in my editor work for once.
IntelliSense is amazing.
Yeah.
And just to make this podcast open and inclusive, let's revise that analogy. And we're going to say that Laravel is the sexy guy that you bring on your arm to the awards show, right?
Person. Let's just go person. Let's just be inclusive.
That's right.
Do we have to equate
No, we don't
PHP
have to.
frameworks with anything sexy?
Are you saying that's a threat? No, but I mean, the real point that I was trying to make is that the Yi framework is incredibly robust, and I have been surprised at the places where I found out that it has been being used, and it's almost more corporate-ish as a framework, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely more popular in like enterprise space than than some other frameworks. I don't know. It's also like it's actually like overall extremely popular, but just not so much in the US. So I think it's I think a lot of it comes down to culture and just I don't know, marketing to different people.
Right. So Craft 3 was your chance to kind of go back and redo everything that you didn't like the way that you did it, and base it on an entirely new version of the Yi framework. And a lot of that you kind of peeled back some of the layers and are falling, kind of falling back more on Yi, right? For some things.
So that was another thing that we just, going back, I don't know what we were thinking. We had this idea, like we weren't like for Yi 1, and like when we were picking a framework, I can't say with a straight face that we loved any of the framework options at the time.
At least you didn't make your own.
No, that wasn't that did not cross our minds. But we in the back of our mind, we were thinking, maybe down the road, maybe for Craft 2, we're going to want to switch this out. We had this idea that like we should insulate Craft's APIs as much as we could away from the framework, in a way where like, if you were working with Craft and writing a plugin, like theoretically we could just swap out the framework down the road and plugins wouldn't have to be updated for it.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So like it has ended up being this like completely, the wrong direction to take. And it ended up, leading us down this path, with lots of, abstraction tends to come with performance implications and the reality of like we just didn't have the time to document every last little thing, especially when like it was kind of similar to the way you did it, and so we could just kind of point people to the eDocs and say, start with this and then like read this function and you'll kind of see how we've modified that. It just ended, it ended up it was a bad situation. So with Craft 3, we're definitely it's much more down to the metal. If you start with the eDocs, you're going to have a much better sense of what development in Craft actually looks like, because much of it is just straight up Yi application development.
And I love that, though. I love that because then I'm not learning something, boutique and custom. And no matter how great of a job you guys do on designing the API, it's still something that I'm never going to use for anything else. Whereas now I would feel very comfortable going to write a custom Yi app if that was something that was called for, which is great. And then you have the community. You have both the Craft community and the Yi community to fall back on, which is amazing.
Right. Yeah.
So rewind in time a little bit. How did Craft CMS come to be? Because here you are, sitting comfortably. I think at the time you were in California, and you were working on plugins for Expression Engine, and I think we're also doing client work and stuff at the time. How did the whole crazy idea of writing your own CMS come up anyway?
It was actually, the original idea came from way back in the day. I've had this idea of like wanting to write a CMS since before I knew what a CMS was. I was doing some freelance work when I first started getting into web development, and kind of learned the nuts and bolts of PHP and MySQL just from building CMS like applications that were all pretty specific, like a location editor or a resume editor or this booking application for a skin spa, just like lots of these one-off CMS type applications. And I think honestly, this was in the early 2000s. I don't know whether there was a flexible, CMS like thing on the off the shelf back then. I don't know where this maps up with things like Expression Engine. But I've been like, ever since then thinking like, man, it'd be cool to like create some tool that was multi-purpose where I could just do all of these sorts of things every time I'm doing a freelance job with this tool. I didn't even know what it would have been called. It wouldn't have been a CMS. I didn't, that term hadn't crossed my mind.
But you didn't want to repeat everything you were doing already, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for me at the time, it was, just this general idea. And then I came across Expression Engine, and that's when it kind of the light bulb went off, like, oh, this is actually a thing. People already figured out that like there's a lot of common problems, and they've decided to call the solution a CMS, and that's kind of when I got into Expression Engine plugin development. Really liked it because it was, pretty closely aligned with, my notes on what a CMS type thing ought to be, in that, you had all these custom fields and all of the data was mostly kind of defined by the admin. So that was kind of the original spark, was back before I even knew what Expression Engine was.
And what a perfect storm for you, by the way, that you got involved with the Expression Engine plugin development community at a time that Ellis Lab, I mean, I don't know what they were doing other than off writing Mojo Motor or, whatever else they were doing. But it ends up being
into podcasts, probably.
Yeah, probably. But it ended up being that like you literally could not make a website without installing a number of Pixel and Tonic plugins. I mean, you could, but it would be horrible, right? So you kind of had a perfect storm in a your CMS patron kind of dropping the ball, and you picked up all of those little balls and ran with them, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Because literally it was an automatic sale for a number of Pixel and Tonic plugins when you were designing an Expression Engine site. It's like, oh, I'm Expression Engine site, I'm going to buy Playa or I'm going to buy assets, and it's a given. Like they just come with it. And I was talking about this with someone who shall remain nameless, that I wasn't sure that there would ever be a Pixel and Tonic of the Craft world, because Craft CMS, the way that it is robust enough, and the front end templating flexible enough that I don't think you're going to have, one company that can have a half a dozen plugins that you're going to buy every time you spin up a new site with it. So that's actually a compliment to you, because you've done a really good job with the base. No, I mean, it is, because the base of Craft,
considering we do have one and it's you.
Well, I don't think it's even comparable, though, because there are a number of plugins for Expression Engine. And I'm not just talking like one or two. I'm talking literally whenever I made an Expression Engine site, 6 sales went your way, for the stuff that needed to be added to it. And that was just filling in the deficiencies in the CMS.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that Craft, the way it is now, is pretty well featured, that you can pretty much do anything that you want on your own. And getting a plugin really then is, well, do I really want to do all of that work myself? Not,
I mean, at the end of the day, I think Craft is like the plugin strategy with Craft is just different. In Expression Engine, at least in the early days, it was like, a lot of our stuff, like I couldn't tell you how to build an Expression Engine website without Playa, because I never did.
Right.
I built that the first Expression Engine site I ever made. I had to write Playa because it just, seemed like an essential feature.
I heard a rumor. I heard a vicious rumor at one of these conferences that the whole reason Craft CMS exists is because of the Canadian government. Can you confirm or deny?
It's
What?
I'm not kidding.
There's some truth to it. No, there's some truth to it.
Okay.
I would have. I got to a point where I was at a different company, different agency, and mostly not working with Expression Engine at all anymore. And I ended up getting contracted to write Playa 2.0, and that was there was a Canadian entity involved in that. And if it hadn't been for that, then then I probably never would have written Playa 2. I probably would have just kind of ducked out of the Expression Engine ecosystem entirely and kind of gone a different way. Who knows if I would have, gotten back into anything CMS related.
I wish I had O Canada like on tap because I would play it right. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, you can go and drive and salute their flag anytime you want, right?
I'm real close. No. And we do go across the border quite a bit. I love it up there. But so that's really interesting. So, in this kind of, chaos kind of thing, the wings of a butterfly. So it looks like we kind of might owe Craft CMS to the Canadian government.
Well,
I'm not saying they wrote it, but.
Not from an intellectual property standpoint,
right? Of course not.
Actually, that was one of the stipulations that kind of got me interested. Was that they, I guess, aren't allowed to own any IP, and so basically the contract was we pay you, you write these things, you get to own it,
and
you can do whatever you want with it.
I got to do more work for the Canadian government.
I know.
So you're saying that Canadians are nice, is what you're saying?
Yes, they're very nice people.
I feel like I've heard that.
Did they apologize after paying you?
Sorry, Canada, we love you.
Oh man. But so we're in the plugin world, and we've got this awesome Canadian money and all that kind of stuff. But what made you then say, like, what made you sit down and say, you know what, I'm going to write my own CMS. Like, now is the time that I'm going to start this.
Yeah, so even after getting into Expression Engine, I still had my ideas, and there was an Expression Engine conference actually in 2010 in San Francisco, and I saw this presentation about editorial design, and it was by one of the Erskine guys at the time, and really awesome presentation, kind of showing off some of the work that he and people like him and Jason Santa Maria have been working on in terms of like stretching Expression Engine to be a really good editorial design platform, where each entry has its own CSS file and its own custom layout imagery and possibly even entirely custom layouts. And really sparked my interest.
So what year are we talking about? Just so people can date it. Like
2010.
2010. Okay, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
This was early January 2010, I think, February or around there. So I immediately went to like drawing an Expression Engine plugin, like thinking basically like what Live Preview ends up looking like now. Thinking like, man, this, like I remember thinking like, this is such a cool concept, but the workflow just sucks. Tweak some CSS, save the entry, go to a different tab, check it out in the browser, never knowing whether, what you're saving and pushing to production was going to break the page or not.
It was a guaranteed way to get carpal tunnel, constantly click, click, reload, click. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So I immediately kind of started playing around with that, realized that the way that Live Preview should be implemented just couldn't be done as a plugin for another CMS. So threw that in the, on the back burner. And then separately, had a lot of ideas for Matrix. Matrix was definitely my favorite of the Expression Engine plugins in terms of like what got the most of my attention and what was the most interesting of a challenge to me.
That was one of the 6.
Yeah. And I saw a blog post that kind of likened matrix rows to entries, and that kind of sparked my interest as well. That concept of like, what if each of these rows was an entry in quotes? What if there was more to these things than just emulating this part of entries, but what if they really could be their own entries? And that kind of pushed me down this idea. In that point I realized like if I was going to address this question, this would need to be its own CMS. And so that was kind of the technical motivator, was like kind of going down this road of like what if there was a system where the thing that an entry was inherited a lot of the same things from this like core element that a matrix row or a matrix block had, and then users and categories and all these other things for that matter. There were plenty of plugins that were trying to make all of these things act more like entries.
Now I heard another vicious rumor at a conference, Brent, was that the whole concept of an element type was Brad Bell had copious amounts of alcohol in his system, and he was like, "Hey, man, what if everything is just the same, man, and it all kind of comes from the same thing, you know?" Is there any truth to that one?
No, that one I don't think so. I can attribute like some of the technical implementation of where we are today to Adrian McNeil, if you know who he is. He was another prominent expression engine add-on developer. Did the original Espresso store plugin and stuff like that. We had like a 4-hour lunch in Napa one day, and I was kind of going over all these different like technical problems I was dealing with the current implementation, and he had a few ideas that like made me realize I was going about it all wrong. And so
those end up being the best conversations, though, because when someone shows you that your whole approach is wrong, they have just saved you like so much time. You know what I mean?
Because totally. In the end, it was like now I've got to spend like a month undoing everything we were doing in the beta and redo it in a different way and write this like I think there was like a 2,000 line long migration to get all the data up to date. And
oh my goodness!
Oh,
yeah,
boy.
but that's versus years of dealing with something that doesn't work right. And then you got a monkey patch left and right. So I mean, I consider that a gain.
Yeah, for sure in the long run.
So I mean that's where it ended up coming from. What was the original name for this thing? Has it been Craft the entire time?
Originally, it was going to be Blocks, and I have no like the original idea I had for a CMS back before I even knew what Expression Engine was basically something closer to just a matrix field. Each entry was basically just a matrix field, and you could kind of like create these these blocky type things and combine them together. And yeah, exactly. It's kind of like a Lego metaphor, I guess. Like I wanted this CMS where it came with all these components and you could build anything you wanted in the same way Legos be modular and build anything you want.
Andrew loves a good Lego metaphor.
I do love a good Lego metaphor. No, I'm laughing.
There you go. That's where Blocks came from. So originally we called it Blocks, and then wrote the CMS and realized, hey, wait, we didn't actually implement this this block metaphor the way that we had imagined the cornerstone of it being back in the day. So decided against that name and renamed it to Craft right when we released.
Well, I'm glad
there also a naming thing. Yeah, I feel like there was another Blocks that I feel like I remember that from that old listserv.
Expression Engine plugin for managing.
That came after.
Okay.
Yeah, that came after.
Well, I'm just glad he didn't take a cue from Yi and call it like YYC or yes you can. Something terrible like that. Yeah. The funny thing about what you're describing, the block kind of metaphor for putting pieces together, is that this is exactly what WordPress is doing with their Project Gutenberg. Like that is literally what they're doing. Is exactly what you're talking about,
more or less. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a ton of interesting, like the whole blocks concept has definitely evolved beyond Matrix. And this is kind of an area where like right now I'm like, it's been great. It's been great getting Craft 3 out, and I'm definitely happy with all the changes that happened. But at the same time, man, we just spent 3 years basically not progressing the content model and just rewriting all of our own internal stuff and making our own lives better and plugin developers' lives better. But we haven't done as much as we'd want in terms of like progressing the content modeling. And so there definitely is some catch up we have to play going forward in terms of like, taking a look at what Gutenberg's doing and Statomic's doing. And they've both introduced some interesting ideas for sure.
And the competitors are everywhere, Sanity.io and all these other.
I was actually just going to say like Sanity is another really interesting one that we're looking at now in terms of, it's kind of moved to this whole particle concept where, every little thing is a particle. Headings are a particle, paragraphs are a particle, and it does wonders for collaborative editing, and it's kind of an interesting take. So
the particles be broken down into neutrons and protons and electrons.
And characters anyway. I don't know. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So, I think of Craft 3 as kind of like the bedrock, right? And I would imagine you guys are like, yes, now we have this bedrock. Now we can build our awesome stuff on top of it.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, we've got 3 years of ideas piled up, and and the other thing too is like, this has all been going into one release. People that have been paying attention to know that every day there were new things getting added to the beta and to the release candidates, and
I know that all too well.
Yes, well, and yeah, so sometimes it was a great thing, sometimes it was a pain in the ass. But internally, we've got this momentum now. that people haven't really seen if they haven't been paying too close of attention, just because we haven't been able to create these like marketing efforts around each individual little feature. But we've got this really fun, fast-paced momentum going on right now. So we're just going to continue applying that. Like we've already started working on 3.1. We've already got the next, get probably the next 10 minor releases, not planned, but we've got enough features anyway that we want to get to that could fill up 10 more releases.
And we're going to get into that. We're going to pump you for information and see what we can get out of you. But before we do that, so back in October at the first .all conference, which is for people who don't know, .all is Pixel and Tonic's essentially their craft conference, right? And the first one was back in October in Seattle. Was it Seattle or Portland?
It was Portland.
Portland. It was back in, okay, whatever. All the West Coast cities blend together for me.
One of those Pacific Northwest cities. Yeah.
Here's was Seattle last year, yeah.
All right, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm all messed up.
At the conference and you can remember where it was.
It's all beards and
yeah.
It's just beards all the way down.
It's beards and forests and Starbucks. I mean, everywhere around. But anyway, you announced back in October of 2017 at that .all conference that you were releasing Craft CMS 3, and you were releasing a new software as a service built on that CMS in the plugin store, and you were building a new customer portal in Craft ID, and you were releasing Craft Commerce 2 built on top of all of that would power the software as a service, the plugin store, and would power everything else. Mm-hmm. I mean, I heard that announcement and I was like, wow, like that is a lot to take on. So what were you thinking and how did that all go?
You'll notice that the common thread with all of this is going to be, we aren't thinking.
Because
you didn't mention the best part of it, which is that I even gave it a release date.
And yeah, that's right. And you gave it a firm release date of April 4th, And again, I just looked at this from the point of view of like any one of these things was a decent amount of work, but doing them all at the same time and all in interdependent ways. I mean, that's rough, man. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. I mean, we are insane for sure. It was stressful and it was a lot of work. We did our best to split it up into smaller things. So people weren't, it was definitely April 4th was like the day where most of the things hit. But, we launched the first release candidate in, what was that? I guess December or January, whatever. And that introduced like a early version of the plugin store. And that was kind of our opportunity to start testing all of our composer stuff and like make sure that, the general, back end for managing plugin releases and getting those updated as the plugins got new tags and all the automatic installation and updating and all that kind of stuff kind of gave us a chance to start testing all of that in the real world,
right? Because nothing breaks software like people actually using it.
Yeah, right? No, for sure. And like for the next like week and a half, we were doing nothing but fixing bug after bug after bug related to that. Right. And the whole time, like instead of being freaked out, we were thinking like, thank God we're doing this now instead of like on April 4th or after April 4th.
Oh dear God!
Do you ever look back at like release candidate 1 and think, oh, we were so naive calling that a release candidate?
You know what? No, because I mean, we were aware that the plugin store related things were going to be buggy. Yep. A lot of those bugs ended up being actually on the server side, not on Craft itself. But we said going into it, like the release candidate label should basically apply to everything besides the plugin store.
Yeah.
And that pretty much held true. There were not any major bugs after that. Just a lot of little minor things that continue on to this day, thankfully, less frequently than they were, in the beta period. But yeah, no, I mean, like we definitely meant it. Like the whole point of doing a release candidate rather than just throwing the plugin store into a beta release is we wanted to create we felt that the rest of the system was really stable at that point. Mm-hmm. And it was time to give people a very clear signal that was the case and that they could start, using it on actual projects, with our blessing and with with the knowledge that we would really be supporting it in the way that we would any other production production release.
And that's
totally.
what major releases are for, right? I mean, they're basically, obviously, you're putting together a big collection of things, some of which may be breaking changes, but a lot of it is just a big signal to people like, hey, this is a big new thing that you need to start using, you know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the really interesting thing about what you did here is doing all this stuff at once. I mean, first of all, again, hats off to you guys. You pulled it off in amazing fashion, but you also kind of are very, very much eating your own dog food in that you have created a software as a service using your platform for that service. And you created a customer portal using your product as a service for that. So I think that probably has given you, not that you didn't have it to begin with, but it's probably given you a ton of insight into A, the fact that, hey, this is awesome. Like Craft 3 can really do all this stuff. But then B, this is the kind of thing that customers are going to be trying to build using our tools, right?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, so it's probably not too much of a secret that one of the big things we want to start tackling in Craft 3.x is integrating an actual API into Craft for accessing content and things like that, and updating, full, I don't know if we'll go with REST or we'll go probably more likely GraphQL.
Well, if you heard the episode, you're supposed to buy out Mark Hewitt for millions of dollars so he can retire to a Caribbean island somewhere,
He'll be waiting a long time for us to get that much money.
I didn't say it was a big island. It could be like a little tiny island,
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, so like it has also given us kind of a chance to start playing with that stuff because, the plugin store, when you buy stuff there, you're buying it over an API that we've kind of designed in preparation for starting to think of things more as APIs. We know that's like a big direction that things are going.
Absolutely.
Everything's API based now. And so we need to make sure that we've got some good experience under our belt with like managing an API for Craft Commerce and for all these other things.
I love the fact that you as a provider of the CMS are incredibly vested in having all of this stuff work. You know what I mean? Because there's a company that
if it stops working, then we stop getting sales.
Right. Mm-hmm. And there's a company that shall remain nameless that they put out a CMS and they didn't build any websites with it. They didn't do anything with it and it stagnated. And I think the fact that you have a product that you are using yourself to do the kind of things that people are doing with it is, I mean, to me, that's incredibly powerful because if the CMS isn't cutting it, it's not going to work for you either,
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's not a lie to say that most of the things in Craft exist because we needed them.
Right.
So,
yeah, I was really impressed when I heard that the plugin store itself and the purchasing process was running on Craft Commerce too. It just made me feel so good about the future of that to know that, you were dog fooding it. You were.
Yeah. And that was another thing that we actually got to launch. We launched that 2 weeks before April 4th.
Right.
There was that big Craft ID launch and the website went down for a couple hours before that launched. And that was basically a 2-hour window where we were migrating all existing purchase data from an old system over to Craft 3, over to Commerce 2, all the licensing data, all that kind of stuff. And then basically when we turned the lights back on, the old web server was basically just a proxy for the new one.
I've got it totally backwards then. I thought that whole period was just your Apple moment where you guys are just like, we're updating the store and you guys are just having beers and stuff.
No way. Anytime we take the site down, it's super stressful on our end. We are.
That's because you're still running web objects.
Yeah. They are, I think.
So Brandon, I mean, this is kind of an interesting time for you, I think, because you have come full circle as a plugin developer for Expression Engine, and then you created your own full-fledged CMS, and now you've created a plugin store where developers can then sell their plugins. I mean, this is like kind of like a crazy circular journey, right? I mean, how
and we're selling plugins in our own plugin store.
Yeah. I mean, it just, you gotta, I would imagine there must be some times where you sit and you look back and you're like, wow, this is pretty amazing. Because you have built not just a tool that a lot of people are using, but you have built a whole ecosystem that people like you 8 years ago, past you, would be using this thing,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely exciting. I'll tell you what, the most excited I've gotten so far in a kind of a reflective, like, holy shit, this is awesome state is when we did our projections for like how much we're going to be paying out to plugin developers this month based on the last couple weeks of sales, the first couple weeks of sales. I don't know if you want to, if this is off limits or not, but looking at like how much we're going to get to pay you, or how much we have paid you, and how much we're projecting to pay you, Andrew, in the first month.
I don't care.
Like the fact that like that could potentially be someone's salary,
Right.
That's the amazing thing for me. It's like that's kind of the moment where it's like, okay, this is all real. This is not just like a theoretical, like this is an actual economy now, and it's actually going to be supporting people here and there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. You used to be the guy that your income primarily was derived from this an ecosystem, and now you've created one that other people can be then thriving off of.
Yeah. And that's the really, like the thought, like, holy shit, Andrew Welsh could quit his job if he wants, and he'd probably be okay. I don't know, how comfortable you'd be, but at the very least,
New York.
You wouldn't be on the streets, or at least you wouldn't be on the streets in certain areas of the country. I don't know.
I really can't quit my job. I mean, I've already done that before, and if I quit my job, because my job is just me. Like, if I quit my job, I guess I just quit life. I guess I'd be.
Well, you could quit. My point is, like, you could do whatever you want.
Right.
Like, it's
kind of a lifestyle business.
And especially for you, like someone that has invested so much into the community, it's nice to know that there's something going back now.
Right. But I also think that like and this is the way that I've thought about it, because I have seen some people are complaining, all the plugins used to be free, which is not really true. I mean, there have been plugins for sale for Craft for a while. There's just been no official source. But people were concerned about the idea of, all these plugins that used to be free are not going to be free anymore. And
they're also going to still exist.
Well, and
that's the nice thing.
Right. I think that's a critical thing to keep in mind, is that, you really want these plugins to continue to be updated. And you want to give people some kind of skin in the game, that they care about making these things better. But I also just kind of look at it at the end of the day when I'm building something. Like, if I was building a new site for someone, I can build it all from scratch, or I can pay, $199 for Craft, right? No brainer. Like the scaffolding that it gives me, it would take me forever to be able to do that on my own. There's just no point in even thinking about it. And I think about plugins in the same way. Like, if it saves you, if your billable rate is, I don't know, $100 an hour, right? Yeah. If this plugin saves you 2 hours worth of time, it's justified as long as it's less than $200, right? I mean,
even if it didn't, even if like the time came out a wash,
right.
Like, it's going to save me an hour, it's going to cost me an hour's worth of billable rate. You're still, if you write it, you're the one that has to maintain it, right. And that's like, you have to think long term about this stuff. Right. Like, if there's someone that you're paying and there's a renewal fee every year, and so they're motivated to continue trying to earn those renewal fees and earn new sales, then they're also going to be maintaining it. They're going to keep this thing alive in a way that, like, I guarantee you've never done for any of your clients that aren't paying you anymore.
Right.
And
I think a lot of the smaller plugins, like I ported, the vast majority of my plugins continue to be free. It's just the ones that I think offer a whole lot of value and or are a whole lot of work to do and maintain. So I think it's awesome that you guys have created kind of a micro economy. I mean, that's kind of what you've done, right?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I mean, and then the other thing too is, we've actually received a few reports from plugin developers that are saying, they've got plugins in the oven now that they wouldn't have done had the plugin store not existed, and so it's also going to lead to just Craft being a generally more interesting, more capable product.
Well, I think this really is a case where it kind of, when you build an economy around a product, you really are accelerating the growth of it. Because like you said, these plugin developers then have an incentive to do it. And then the agencies and or freelancers that use them can just, snap things together and produce higher quality work quicker. And I think it really is something that if you, like, let's say a plugin store never existed, I think that the vast majority of the plugins that would be out there would be plugins that were created incidentally to solve a specific problem for a client. Because that's what a lot of the not all of them, but a lot of the plugins for Craft
even a lot of commercial ones, like that's just the nature of how these things get built.
Yeah, like Playa from the Canadian government, right? I mean, it all kind of flows together in that way. But you then go from things that were designed to solve one specific use case to people actually creating products, like broad products that are designed to work in a flexible number of ways. So I think that's pretty awesome. So let's circle back. So why is Craft CMS 3 a significant release for you guys? Because you worked on this for a long time.
Yeah, over 3 years.
Right. Wow.
I've attended like 3 or 4 Craft 3 workshops in that time.
Yeah. The funny thing is, we just came across this blog post that we had released back when we were gearing up to release the first dev preview.
Yep.
And this was 4 months into the development. We started it like January 1st, and I think we got the dev preview out in April or May, and we released this blog post 4 or 5 months after we started, and it starts off with like, this took a lot longer than we expected, but we finally released the dev preview for Craft 3. And it's hilarious because, like, that was like 1/6 of the way into the actual development before the GA would get out.
Right.
But all for good reasons, all for the right reasons. It's at the end of the day, we've now got a CMS that we think is, first of all, much more scalable, much faster, doing things right from an architectural and best practices point of view. But then also, like, it's it provides a much more flexible, much more capable architecture for building not just plugins but apps.
Yes.
We like this whole Craft ID thing. It's that Craft ID is just a feature of this app we call CraftNet.
No relation to Skynet, I hope.
That's the inspiration. It replaces another system called Elliot, which was an ET reference. So we figured we should stick with a movie theme, and this one does a lot more. So why not Skynet?
I'm glad it wasn't End of Times or something like that.
Yeah, I don't think this one's going to become any kind of singularity.
But that's a huge thing that you mentioned, Brandon, because one of the things I've been kind of mentioning to people is that with Craft 3, yeah, it's a really awesome, capable CMS, and you can use it just as that. But it's also kind of like what people have called a content management framework. Like if you have a custom app that you want to write, you can write it essentially in Yi 2, and then you can leverage the Craft APIs anywhere you want it, and away you go.
Yeah, exactly. So you use Craft for its content modeling features, and even if you want to develop custom content element types or anything like that, there's all that built in. But then what you do with it, what you build on top of that, I mean, it could be, you could build an entire Yi application that has nothing to do with Craft and just happens to tie into some Craft features, or you could build on top of Craft's features and add a bunch of other cool stuff on top of them. I mean, it's like, that's one of the things where, building CraftNet, like we were kind of pleasantly surprised with how well that ended up being as a tool for that.
You probably were like, thank you, past Brandon. You made this really nice.
Yeah. Well, because coming from this previous, incarnation called Elliot, we did, it was annoying writing that, like, because we felt like we should be dogfooding. We felt like this should be written on Craft. At the same time, man, we were fighting with it to build it. It was not a downhill, an easygoing project. And this time around, it's like, it feels like this is like this really is a proper application framework. And we're not fighting with the system anymore. We're just kind of building what we need, and everything's kind of working the way we want it to.
Yeah. Because I think that's the way, and we've talked about it a few times on this podcast, but I think that, web development has become quote unquote real development. And I think there's going to be a schism where, designer developers are probably going to gravitate towards things like Webflow or Wix or things that let them snap together sites more easily. But on the other side of things, you need, for anything that is a web app or is even remotely complicated, you need something like like Craft CMS 3, where you've got a content management framework, where you can build that app and where it's, there's a whole lot of custom development. Maybe you're using a front end framework and the CMS is headless, or, any number of other things. But I think it's a really smart move that you guys have focused a lot on making this something that, hey, you've got this great CMS if you want it. If you want to just build your own custom app using it, go ahead,
Yeah, for sure. No, we definitely at the outset, kind of made a decision that Craft was meant for more interesting, more technical challenges compared to some of its competition.
Now here's a tough question though. Has Craft become too hard for a certain segment of the community to use it?
That's an interesting question. We've gotten some feedback that that Composer's not people's favorite thing in the world. It's definitely not mine either. Nor I don't think is any package manager.
You don't curl up in bed and cuddle with Composer?
It seems like somewhere out there there's like the architecture guide for creating a package manager, and the first step is make it suck. So I don't know, but it's it is what it is. Like that's the way everything's going, and I think, as you said, if you're not capable of evolving as a web developer, your job is being eroded now. By systems that are getting more capable, and frankly, they're pretty great. Like Soulspace and Wix, these are actually really nice platforms if you have simple needs.
I think you mean
even
Squarespace.
WordPress, even. What did I say? Oh, right.
Mitchell.
Mitchell's just like, what the hell? What am I going to build?
No, Squarespace, Wix. Even things like Medium. Where maybe you don't. Medium has custom branding features now too, and it's just as a web developer, I have plenty of friends that have asked me for website advice, and for any of them, I've never once recommended Craft, and or anything else in that league. It's just you can't say that with a straight face when that for a fraction of the cost, for 0 development hours, they could have something that suits their needs with one of these off-the-shelf tools.
But that's what it is, though, Brandon. So all of these, what's happened is a lot of these tools, like Webflow, is pretty amazing, and like you said, Medium and all of these things. But what's happened is a ton of development work. So hard development work has gone into building these sites and making them something that a designer developer can easily use to piece something together. So then there perfectly, you see the schism in the industry between the skill set required to create Webflow, which is, web developers are working on that, versus the skill set it takes to use Webflow to produce web pages, right? And that's really kind of what the schism in the development community is, I think, Well, what I mean is the type of skills that it takes for you to build something like Webflow. There's a ton of web developers that are working on that. They're using front-end frameworks. They're building, everything on the back end. So there is web development work there, but it's real serious nuts and bolts development work that are then creating these really nice services that designer developers can then build on. And so then your choice with something like Craft is, well, are we going to build a service that lets people throw websites together, or are we going to build a tool that people can do this kind of serious development to make some pretty amazing stuff with,
Yeah, it sort of changes the original question that you asked, is to not just is Craft too hard, but does that matter?
Craft 3.
Craft 3. Yeah, is Craft 3 too hard? And does that matter? And I don't think it does. Like you said, it's geared towards,
or maybe
it's geared toward people that are want more out of the system, right? For sure. Let me say, we definitely want to find pain points. We're always looking for pain points, and we want to make those easier. There's no reason Craft should be intentionally difficult to use. Composer sucks in its own ways that annoy anyone, no matter how skilled you are, and those are things that we should fix, or we should find ways to contribute to Composer and fix them there, or whatever it is, whatever the answer is. But so we're not intentionally trying to make Craft harder. I would say beyond Composer itself, I don't think that Craft has gotten more complicated. There's like a little bit of the who moved my cheese
Right.
thing going on where just things are different. We've done our best to kind of keep old functionality working and just throw deprecation errors if we can, where we can. And so hopefully that kind of holds people's hands through that transition a little bit.
And maybe,
but at the same time, like when we're thinking of like new features, like we're not thinking, how can we make this dumber?
Right.
How can we make the existing features dumber? We're thinking like, how can we make the system more capable? How can we make more interesting things easier to do than they are right now?
Yeah, and maybe this is an opportunity for a Craft partner or someone who, the WordPress.com has got a feature where you can just go in there and click a button and point your DNS at it, and you've got a website. Maybe it's an opportunity for a partner to do that with Craft, where you just, you click a button, it spins up a VPS. Here's your instance. Everything's all prefab and set up. Away you go.
Yeah. I could see. So I will say, like, there's like that's. Yeah, I mean, we're thinking of things like that as well. I don't think that we would want to do that with a partner per se. I think that's one of those things where if we did that, that would drastically change the target for Craft, or it would include a whole new segment of people that we currently don't really go after.
They could do it. If some partner wanted to do that, maybe they could do it and spin it up, or maybe some of these pain points, now that you've got the foundation of Craft 3 laid out, maybe some of the things that are difficult for people to do, like, content syncing and all that kind of fun stuff, are things that you guys can then address.
Yeah. So, like, as far as that goes, I mean, we do, like I mentioned, the API stuff, like we definitely want to give Craft more an API. And then one thing we're kind of considering is like, we've been kind of looking into this whole serverless thing, like
internetless.
Pay attention to Netlify CMS. Yeah, well, that's the logical conclusion of all this stuff is a bunker somewhere. But yeah, like there's some really cool stuff going on there with like Netlify CMS and all those things. So we've been kind of thinking like how cool would it be if we did have some kind of service where you could spin up Craft, but you don't have access to templates or anything. Like all you do is define your API, using a GraphQL, designer or whatever it is. And then all we're doing is giving you this endpoint, kind of like Contentful, but with Craft's, full blown content modeling support. And
if it spits out kind of static HTML, like that would be amazing, because then you can distribute it on
who wants HTML anymore?
Well, whatever it ends up being, it can spit it out and it can be stuck on a CDN and you can just load it from anywhere,
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea is it'd provide these APIs, and then you could go in and create something on Netlify or GitHub Pages or whatever you want, and just no PHP server required anymore. You just here's some Axios commands that you can plug in or whatever it is.
So, I mean, this is a perfect transition. Someone from the Craft Slack named The Sky Floor came out with a blog where
Fred Carlson.
What's that?
Or no, I'm sorry. No, I'm just thinking.
Oh, okay. So he came out with a blog where he's listing all of the things that are kind of on the Craft roadmap for things that you guys are working on. Are there any big features that you feel comfortable talking about that you're excited about to get implemented now that you have this awesome kind of backbone in place?
Yeah, I mean, mainly like we're just so antsy to start doing new features. It doesn't matter what it is. Like we could, it doesn't matter. We could build a MySQL client in Craft and it'd be fun right now, like as long as it's something new. No, we have a huge, basically like anytime, someone suggests a feature, if we think, yeah, this really does feel like something cool, that would make sense, then we're we try and add it to an internal list somewhere. More recently, we've gone through and kind of looked at all the things that we want to do and thought, like, which of these things could we potentially get done in Craft 3 without, waiting on some new architectural change that would require a breaking, Craft 4 release. And anything that could potentially fit that, we've put it into this 3.1 project on GitHub, 3.x project on GitHub. That doesn't mean that all of those things will make it into 3.x. Some of them, once we get into it, might realize like, oh, this really does require a change that would be more of a Craft 4 type thing. And in that case, we'll have to put it back on the shelf for a little bit.
I don't know. I'm looking at this blog
but-
post and I see a to-do list for 3.1. These are all going to be done in the 3.1 release, right?
No, there's no public to-do list for 3.1. I mean, I will tell you,
this looks binding to me.
Like the 3.1, don't it's all theoretical at this point, but like the 3.1 release is the focus is going to be on collaboration and making it easier to work on craft with a team. And even there, like that's a broad topic. So there's only certain aspects of it that we'll be able to get to in this first release. The big thing is going to be just, improving content migrations, which was kind of like our, like content migrations as it is in Craft 3 literally took like 2 minutes to implement. We were already refactoring how migrations worked. And in the, while we were at it, we went ahead and like added a couple lines of code to support this concept of content migrations. But we're really going to be building on that in Craft 3.1. And we want to get
for anyone who doesn't know, content migrations is basically solving of the problem of, you edit something in one place, maybe you add some fields in local dev. How do you then sync that up with staging and production, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's if you're familiar with any sort of application framework that has migrations, it's that. It was actually a bad name looking back, and we're probably going to rename it to just project migrations. But it's basically a migration track, an application migration track for your project, as opposed to like the Craft CMS itself or plugin specific migration tracks. But the point of them is, twofold. First of all, so that Craft works better as an application framework, so that if you're building an application where, you need to manage your own schema and all that kind of stuff that's very project specific, you can start creating those tables, modifying those tables, whatever it is, you can do those in migration files that aren't tied to a plugin, that are just tied to the project as a whole. But then secondly, we're looking at this as potentially a vehicle for more interesting, collaboration type stuff. Like, let's say that you have a section called news or let's say you have a section called blog, and you want to rename it to news, and you also want to rename the handle. If you want to do that, you need a way to do that, where it's communicating that change to everyone else that's using the same system. And it's not as easy as just changing a value in some, static config file. People have recommended that before. The problem there is like, how do you tell the other systems without just requiring everyone to import a new database? How do you tell all these other environments, that, oh, this section that was called blog is now called news? You really need that migration file that kind of sets this point in time where it's like, okay, before this it was called news, now it's called blog. Or I'm sorry,
something kind of analogous to how Git works in terms of there being a way to mark these things and to merge changes together and keep track of all this stuff, right? I mean, conceptually.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying conceptually you need something like that, some kind of distributed way where various pieces can be modified and there's some kind of a history that you can backtrack and then kind of put everything all back together, right?
Yeah, and so like in our case, it's going to be a combination of, we want to move everything to a config file. We want to have like all sections, all structured, settings type stuff defined in a static config file, like a YAML file or a JSON file or something. And that would just get committed to Git right alongside any other changes that are going on. And then when something changes in there that would actually have database implications, like a section's handle was renamed, in that case, it's just a matter of like also adding a content migration or project migration if we rename it. That kind of communicates that name change to everything.
You weren't kidding
else.
about the whole database list, though. Sorry, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, I was gonna say so.
Database still exist. But.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that. Similar to what Advanced Custom Fields does in WordPress. Every time you create a new thing, whether it be a field grouping, an individual field, it creates a hash JSON blob, and that hash is kind of its unique ID for the life of whatever it's called, whatever its handle is, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then as it moves upstream from your local up to staging or maybe back down, in the GUI, you go
if
and
the
click
hash changes, then it knows to update the other environment kind of thing.
Yeah, but even then, you click on something that says sync, like bring me up to date with whatever's latest in those migrations. It's pretty
Right.
nifty. Yeah.
Yeah.
Every time I hear about stuff like this in WordPress, I just think of like some of the towers that my kids build, where they just, like they build this really cool thing, and they stack all sorts of stuff on top of it, and then it just falls over.
It does make me sad that underneath all this cool ACF stuff, it's all post meta.
Right.
Like there's no nice architecture there at a table level. And yeah, it's a little scary.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
Brandon,
That's
we've got Craft 3 is out, and I know a lot of people that aren't necessarily software developers are like, oh, you just released a major new version, you must be out celebrating. But from someone who's been there, like typically post-release, like the actual release is the calm before the storm, right? Because the release it's in people's hands, people are having issues with it, there are things that you didn't foresee that aren't, now that monkeys are actually banging on the typewriter, things don't work the way you thought they would. What's it like? Give us a vignette into the Pixel and Tonic offices, post-release.
Yeah, it was. So I will say, I think it was more crazy leading up to the 4th in our case. There were just so many things that came together at the last minute. We actually had the team in town. We flew everyone in for 2 weeks leading up to the launch. And the task list going into that was gigantic. There was just so many things that like we had kind of been pushing off because we thought it would be better to do in person or whatever it was.
Crying when they looked at it? Were there any tears?
No. We held our wits, but yeah, I mean, it was pretty nuts. We were all burning the candle at both ends. It was, a lot of alcohol was consumed for sure. A lot of coffee as well. But then, yeah, and then the 4th was crazy. We kind of kicked our last critical bug fix out around 5:55 p.m. And then at 6 we had a bar that we had reserved for the night that we went over to, and spent like 4 or 5 hours there.
You should hopefully
and then
look at everyone's phone.
That's what I was
and
gonna
didn't
say.
let them look at it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Do that?
Yeah. But then Friday, pretty casual. There were a few things that came up, but still, not as bad as the days before. And we actually spent the second half of Friday doing, talking about the future and, doing various internal team type stuff.
Trust falls.
And then everyone flew home on Saturday. No trust falls. We don't trust each other that much. But yeah, and then it was definitely crazy. It started picking up the next week. I would say at this point things have mostly settled down. We're pretty much back to a normal support cycle at this point. So it actually ended up being a lot better than we expected. We were kind of getting ourselves nerved up and thinking like we're not gonna be able to handle this. Should we introduce some kind of like urgent support ticket concept ahead of time just so that people have a way to get to us if we just can't get to them within 2 days or whatever. We started kind of over engineering this like just planning for a gigantic support wave, and then it turns out that thankfully, because the CMS has been out for so long and the release candidate's been out for a couple months and so many people have actually been using it, really the only thing we've been dealing with that's like new since the launch is like composer issues for people that don't like Composer, and had been holding off on Craft 3 until they had a way to download.
What I sometimes have run into is people using something that I've written in a way that I never expected them to use it, and I'm like, I never expected that anyone would do that. Like I didn't even think of that. But it sounds like, Craft has been pretty well battle tested. To some extent, with people using it in various, whether it's the betas or the release candidates or what have you. But this is just my speculation. I have no way of justifying this, but maybe the answer to this. But it seems to me that the people that are using Craft 3 now, you'll have some people that have been kicking the tires, but it's mostly been kind of the people who don't mind living on the bleeding edge, who are probably a little bit more tolerant of, things not working as expected and are very comfortable submitting issues on GitHub and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of expect the community as a whole, or agencies as a whole to pick Craft 3 up a little bit slower. Does that kind of reflect what you're seeing, or how is that working out?
Not really. I mean, it seems like ever since we've launched, people are just assuming this is the new thing they should use. So we the only time we've seen new projects working on Craft 2 at this point is for because they have some plugin they still need, mostly Craft 2 at this point is support is all maintenance, and new things are all happening on Craft 3. So it's actually been pretty amazing.
But I think there's going to be
it's really impressive. Yeah, I was going to say, just to see how many of the large plugins, people really got behind them and made the push over to Craft 3. It was a complete rewrite. It's so amazing that, sometimes there are little ones that you may have to work around, but and some sites I'm sure will just live out their days as Craft 2 sites, but it's really not that hard to get started on Craft 3 with a lot of the plugins that you kind of know and love from the past have already made it over.
Yeah, we were very pleasantly surprised with how much the plugin community has embraced.
Almost like there was a factory that was churning them out.
That's right.
Come on, it's the obvious.
Yeah, obviously that's fine.
No, it's a good point. No, plugin factory has played a huge role in this. It's been, the fact that there's all this scaffolding and the comments are in there, and people I know a lot of people have that's how they've started familiarizing themselves and porting things, is that they'll create, okay, let's create the scaffolding in pluginfactory.io with the same features my plugin currently has, and then look at the comments and see what I'm supposed to do to port this stuff over. So
I mostly just said it because I can't resist a dumb joke.
But it is worth bringing up, because that's been an integral part of getting everyone on board. But yeah, we've just been super stoked. We weren't really sure, we decided early on, when we realized how big of a change Craft 3 was going to be for all plugins. We made a decision early on that's a good enough reason for holding off on doing a plugin store until Craft 3 comes out, because that would make a really good incentive for people to port their thing. Would be, hey, port it and port it in time for the Craft 3 launch, and you'll be in the plugin store on day one.
Right. And to Patrick's point, any plugin that didn't end up getting ported, I think a lot of them probably will be ported. A ton of them already have, but
we're working with plugin developers every day.
But there's also the incentive, as Brandon was saying, that now that there's a plugin store, someone can take up that slice of the market. If there's someone that is importing something, you can get in there and you can fill it up, and it doesn't necessarily have to be even something that you're necessarily going to sell. Just the fact that there is now a centralized place where all of these things are, I think is fantastic. I think it's really, really huge. Yeah. Well, Jonathan, you've been kind of quiet over there. You getting any sleep from your baby, or what's going on, man?
Yeah. When I can.
You got any questions for Brandon?
The topic of commerce came up earlier, so I thought this was interesting because we haven't really seen Pixel and Tonic go out and acquire a lot of plugins that started with a third party and sort of bring that into the fold as the first party plugin. What about commerce made you guys decide, we have to own this?
We felt pretty strongly that it was important that there was a strong e-commerce offering in the Craft ecosystem. And we had seen from Expression Engine, numerous e-commerce platforms come and go. Just because
I'm going to have a conniption.
Oh God, yes. Oh yes.
I feel like you're the one that just. But yeah, it's we knew it's a really hard challenge because there's no two e-commerce sites that are the same, and there's so many more opportunities for them to vary than some sites that are just regular craft sites. There's so many more crazy business logic rules and integration needs that are going on, because you've got e-commerce site is just kind of this central hub for all of these business operations,
and that's where companies are willing to spend money, right? I mean, they're willing to spend significant amounts of money around something that generates revenue for them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's their bread and butter right there. So we just we felt like if there was going to be a strong e-commerce thing in Craft and it wasn't just going to be some integration with Snipcart or Shopify or whatever, that we pretty much had to own it. Otherwise it's just like, even if there was a notable, plugin developer, like even if Andrew Welsh comes out with his own e-commerce thing, and at the time, Sprout Commerce was a thing that was announced and people were using it in like an private alpha situation. But even if you had the strongest name behind it, if it wasn't first party, like we just felt like, it wasn't going to establish a strong enough reputation, and just people had been burned too many times by other third party type e-commerce offers.
Yeah,
thought it was important to own one. We also didn't want to write one, so that kind of put us in an
Wait, so since you mentioned that second, I assume that's the primary reason.
Yeah, slipped it in at the end.
And who doesn't love Luke?
Oh, he turned out to be this like unicorn of a hire. Like he's hilarious. He's such a nice guy. He's so helpful, and he does really like take the time. Anytime someone's running into an issue or needs more out of commerce than it currently offers, he does take the time to really like think through the problem and come up with like what's the right solution for this and what's the best short-term solution for the customer, but what's the better long-term solution. And he's exactly what we want out of a good lead developer. So he's been awesome.
Yeah. Speaking of that, where are you on headcount now? How many folks are at Pixel and Tonic?
We're at 10 people right now.
Got it. Yeah.
So, nice even number. So we'll probably just stay here for a while.
All right. And one other question, just as Pixel and Tonic is still the company behind Craft CMS.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that being that for the foreseeable future? And pixelandtonic.com, is that website ever going to be updated?
Pixel and Tonic says it's categorically
It's
Craft 2 just came out.
Craft 2.
It officially became outdated. It officially became outdated on April 4th. We never actually said Craft 2.0. It just said Craft 2. And categorically awesome doesn't necessarily mean categories. I don't know.
Right.
So, yeah. We're definitely keeping the brand. We're using it, like it's who we're attributing Craft CMS to in the footer, and all of our first party plugins are, attributed to Pixel and Tonic in the plugin store. It's definitely important for us to keep the brand because it would be awkward to, buy Craft Commerce from Craft CMS. I don't know. Like that just seems weird.
Yeah, I've always just thought about 37 Signals eventually just becoming Basecamp, and that's just my feeling.
They're not selling a bunch of plugins for Basecamp,
True.
And they're not. Yeah, they don't have like for us, like Craft Commerce really is like on. It might be a plugin for Craft, but at the same time, like development wise, it is its own standalone product. In terms of how we think about it and how we plan for it. So it would be weird. I think it makes more sense.
Yeah, and it's very common to have a parent business that owns a brand. The Alphabet company owns Google. So what?
Yeah. If those kids can.
Nice.
So we definitely do need to update the website. We've started playing around with that, ideas for that, but it's probably just going to be like a one pager. I don't know if you remember. Back when GitHub was young, there was like a thing in the footer you could click on that would take you to like their parent company's page. And all it was like a photo from Star Trek with like the creators of GitHub's faces
maybe
cropped into the pictures instead of Kurt.
Awesome.
What was that?
You could do a Wix site maybe.
Come on. That actually would be a great troll though, Brandon, if that company said that it was running WordPress.
Yeah, well, so that was so, and I guess I'll say it now because the time has passed. But I had a plan for an April Fool's joke. I hate April Fool's jokes, which is part of why we released Craft 2 on April Fool's. But I was thinking this year, if we had the time, I would update whatever the response headers are on craftcms.com to make things like Wappalizer think it was running.
Dear God.
But then, like in the thick of it, like the idea of taking 5 minutes to do that was just way too much time. So,
is there anybody else? Brandon, first of all, thank you for coming on, and it's been fantastic talking with you. And you opened up with a bunch of stuff about the kind of the inner workings of Pixel and Tonic, and I think that was probably something that is going to interest a whole lot of people that are listening. But more importantly, we got to hear kind of your insight on Craft 3. And why it's such an important release, and some of the really awesome stuff that you have in store in the future. So I hope we can have you on again. But that about wraps it up for another episode of the devMode.fm podcast. To have every episode delivered to your favorite podcast player, subscribe to our RSS or subscribe via iTunes or Google Play. And if you like what we're doing, leave us a review. It helps. People search the reviews, they sort them by stars and all that stuff.
Only 7 so far.
We're gonna review shame people.
A little bit, or we're just gonna talk really highly about the people who do give us a review.
You've got to suggest this at the intro because no one's going to listen
Brandon,
for 120 minutes.
They're hanging on every word that you're saying. What are you talking about? Come on. You can also follow us on Twitter at devModeFM, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Leave us a comment on the devMode.fm website. For the devMode.fm podcast, I'm Andrew Welch.
I'm Earl Johnston.
I'm Patrick Harrington.
And I'm Jonathan Melville.
And a special thanks to Pixel Tonic's Kingpin, Brandon Kelly. Thank you, Brandon, for coming on.
Thanks, man.
Pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.